Everybody, welcome back. We're here with the Week 9 NFL DFS Advice live Q&A show. FanDuel, DraftKings, Yahoo. Strategies, Q&A, stacks, top plays, ownership. We'll talk about it all here in this live Q&A for about 30 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. We'll see here. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. Flying solo this week. Moose flew solo last week, so I had to return the favor this week. And so it'll just be me. And taking the advice from Moose last week, he said you need to slow down because if you don't and you're doing it by yourself, you will run out of time and the stream will end in like 12 minutes. So we're going to take this very nice and slow and we'll answer all questions. Ideally, you guys have some more questions for me and that'll speed up the show some and that'll get us to the end here. And so what we'll do here, I'll talk about some of the stacks that Chris has written up in our daily plug. I'll talk about some of the stacks that aren't in there that I'm considering. I still haven't fully built my lineups yet, so I don't have a full picture of exactly what I'm going to do, but we'll talk about it here together. And we'll just talk about some ownership, where we expect the field to go, how we can exploit it, things like that. Now, this is a weird time during the day. I know if you're a UFC fan, the UFC starts here at 4 p.m. Eastern. If you're a college football fan, obviously there's college football all day. So I know it's a tough time for most of you to join live. So we'll try to get as much information in here as we can that's relevant for those of you who are watching this back on replay. So let's just jump into it. Don't want to wait too long. And 10 games on the slate. Very interesting because ownership is going to condense even more than we've seen over the past few weeks. So that obviously changes some things. And we had some late week news as far as running backs go. Jonathan Taylor was ruled out. Let's go to the Occupy model, occupyfantasy.com. I have the running back model up here. And if we sort by projected ownership, we'll see that Deion Jackson, let's give this a refresh just to make sure we have the most updated information. And yeah, Deion Jackson, actually not going to be as highly owned as I thought he was going to be, and not as highly owned as our initial projections when they came out on Friday had Deion Jackson, but still going to be highly owned on FanDuel because he's just $5,000 over there. Incredibly cheap. Now, JT is out, but there are a couple concerns here with Deion Jackson. So obviously he has two other capable backs behind him. They did trade for Zach Moss. Zach Moss doesn't sound like he's going to play because they called up both Philip Lindsay and Jordan Wilkins from the practice squad. Jordan Wilkins has been with the team before in the past, so he knows the system. And yeah, even though Frank Reich said this is the Deion Jackson game, and Deion Jackson has told us, at least on Twitter, that he's not even gotten in his bag yet. So we'll see. The other concerning thing here is the target share. The reason he hit value in that game he started a few weeks ago is because he caught an Austin Eckler-esque, 9 or 10 passes, whatever it is. That was with Matt Ryan under center. However, if you look at Matt Ryan's running back target share when he's playing versus Sam Ehlinger's last week and Sam Ehlinger in the preseason, Ehlinger's is considerably lower, pushing the ball downfield, taking off and running a little bit more. So that's a concern. Bad offensive line, bad team in general. If JT hasn't been getting there, can Deion Jackson get there? Sure. We actually saw it happen, this same situation a few weeks ago. But I think there is more cause for concern this week. But again, it's a tough price on FanDuel to fade him just because of what he allows you to do with the rest of your lineup. Other running backs that are checking in pretty popular. Aaron Jones, unsurprisingly on FanDuel, especially against Detroit, who has trouble stopping the run, trouble stopping most players in general. Aaron Jones, ETN, Austin Eckler. I see Ed's in the chat. Says Jamal Williams going to break the slate. Yeah, let's talk about that just a little bit. Just 4% ownership for Jamal Williams. Let's make sure you guys can see this in the screen here. Jamal Williams, just 4% projected ownership. Projected pretty highly. Let's see here. We have him top 10, top 12, but in a great game environment where the total is 50. And they're still going to rotate backs. Craig Reynolds is going to get work. Head coach Dan Campbell came out and said, despite DeAndre Swift practicing in full all last week, that Swift's not back. He's not ready to go. We'll give him out there for a couple plays, see how he can do it. Doesn't sound like he's going to be that effective, get that many snaps. So, yeah, it is Jamal Williams, the lead guy in one of the better game environments on the slate. So, yeah, I think he's a great pivot away from some of these other guys that are 15, 20, 30% ownership. So, if you remember in the early $1 Million Mission videos, preseason week 1, we talked about trying to find some of those under the radar backs. As the slate size shrinks, especially as bye weeks increase, we see, let's go to DraftKings, we see more and more And again, this has been a phenomenon around the industry, both for NFL and NBA, especially this year, where not only us, but other industry sites have been under projecting players at the top end. So, like for instance, Travis Etienne projects 32%. It would be shocking if he checked in at less than 32% tomorrow. Like, there's a good chance he's 40% plus, definitely higher in smaller contests. So, as that happens, so the ownership has to come from somewhere. As a result, we see some of these lower end guys end up 2, 3, 4%. So, and again, it's not like, I mean, Etienne's a great play, Stevenson's a great play, Kenneth Walker's a great, like all these guys are great plays, but there's similar volume at some of these other guys like Jamal Williams, like, I'm just looking at these 5% guys, like Eno if James Conner is out, like Leonard Fournette, like Singletary. It doesn't sound like Nyheim Hines is going to make his debut tomorrow, at least not on offense. So Dalvin 6%. I mean, there's a bunch of guys here. I think running back. Honestly, one of the guys I like the most this week is Antonio Gibson. 10% on DraftKings, 9% on FanDuel. J.D. McKissick is out. Let's go over to FanDuel here really quickly. And if we look at running back, Antonio Gibson, if I can find him, there he is, 5,500. So he's a great price on DraftKings. J.D. McKissick is out, facing the Vikings. The Vikings are also missing their top defensive lineman, run stuffer Dalvin Tomlinson. He's out. But with J.D. McKissick out, that just opens up Gibson for the passing game role more and more and more. Brian Robinson has not been that guy in the few games he's played for Washington. So Antonio Gibson, for me, is one of those great pivot running backs this week because he'll likely see 5+ targets. He's been dynamic, and his targets are further down the field than J.D. McKissick's. So big fan of Antonio Gibson this week because he should split a decent amount of the rushing work and get all the passing work. So a big fan of him this week. Let's see. We got Monty in the chat. Appreciate y'all. Use our lineup builders. Win damn near every night. Appreciate that. Thank you, Monty. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for watching all the time. Yeah, we do what we can. So keep watching. Yeah, speaking of, so Ed's in the chat talking about Stevenson, no Harris, Williams with no or limited Swift. Yeah, so Stevenson, that's the other piece of news we're waiting on. And I was gone most of the morning. I did a quick check before I went live here. I didn't see confirmation if Damian Harris was indeed out yet. Didn't practice all week. Still listed as questionable. So we'll monitor that. Not like he's been taking a lot of touches away from Stevenson anyways. But yeah, if he's out, it's certainly a smash spot for Ramondre Stevenson. And yeah, as Neil says, Stevenson will be mega chalk. Yeah, I expect a lot of these guys to be pretty popular. So, all right, let's talk about some game stacks here really quickly. Again, if you guys have questions, you want to change the direction of the show, go ahead and do it. That way you don't have to listen to me talk and ramble on for 30 minutes or whatever it is. So let's go to game stacks. And I'm going to go to the quarterback tab really quickly in the model. And let's just sort by projected total or Vegas total. If I can find it. There it is. All right. So the games that Chris wrote up in the plug. And these are the games we tend to default to because Chris and I and Moose are always on the same page for the most part. And then there's some off-the-wall ones that we throw out here on this show. And I think there are a couple this week. And the reason for that is not because I necessarily disagree with what Chris has said in the plug. I actually like those. There's like 8 games or 8 sides at least that I think you could potentially stack and feel comfortable out the rest of your lineup. So obviously the ones that Chris talked about, right? Seattle and Arizona is the big one. Kyler Murray ranks near the top of our model this week. Getting DeAndre Hopkins back has been big for that offense. Seattle, if you remember, we stacked this game up the first time and Arizona just could not do anything. They had some offensive line issues. They had no D-Hop, other injuries. Assuming this game is closer this time around, we should see a shootout. And a lot of the pieces fit really nicely together. Obviously, you have the concentrated target volume on Seattle side with Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. And the Arizona side, there's just so many different pieces that you can use to help fit. So D-Hop is obviously expensive. Let's go to DraftKings really quickly, and I'll just show you. So we'll go to Flex. We'll go to Arizona. It's also nice because this is one of 2 4 p.m. games somehow, so worst scheduling possible. So if you stack this game up, you got a lot of information before it starts on if you need to swap it or change or do anything. That is one benefit, another benefit of stacking this game. All right, so D-Hop obviously expensive. But then you have Rondale at 5,200, Zach Ertz at 5,100. They said they want to get Robbie Anderson more involved this week. So if you're playing 150 max and you want to throw in some Robbie Anderson in your Arizona stacks, he's an option as well. But Rondale and Ertz especially open up a lot of options for you on both sites. Let's see here. We got some more comments and stuff in the chat. All right, well, let's get to those in a second. Let's talk about these game stacks, and I'll get to the comments and the questions here. So Arizona, Seattle, top for us. Buffalo has to be a top option. Jets defense has been great this year, but again, it's Buffalo and Josh Allen, and they have a very high ceiling. And this sticks out to me. I think it's a stack that you can certainly consider, especially small field contests. It is a little expensive, and there's the issue of do you run it back? Because Buffalo is now a 13-point favorite. Historically, when you have double-digit favorites, running it back has been a negative EV proposition. But Diggs at 8,400, Davis at 6,900, McKenzie and Khalil Shakir have been splitting slot snaps. McKenzie has a slight edge there, but it's not like we have a third full-time guy. Dawson Knox hasn't been extremely involved in the offense. So the thing is, most people who play Josh Allen will just stack him up with Stephon Diggs. The other issue is there, not that we necessarily care too much about cornerback matchups, but Sauce Gardner's been legit as a rookie. And if Sauce can limit Diggs in any way, he's going to be tough to pay off the $8,400 price tag. Now, Gabe Davis just missed the underperforming wide receiver list this week. So if you throw in Gabe Davis, that automatically makes this stack unique, or if you don't use Diggs at all. But again, do you run it back? Do you not? I lean towards not running it back, despite the cheap prices of Garrett Wilson, 4,800, and Tyler Conklin, 3,200. But this just seems like a blowout spot to me. I mean, Zach Wilson's been horrific. Now he's going against this defense. So, yeah, it's tough. I think if there's one of these stacks you leave out and opt for a different one, or just don't play it completely, is Buffalo, just because of the limited options and the pricing of how it limits the rest of your lineup. So, but again, if you look at any metrics, it's going to pop as a stack. Just not sure 13-point favorites are, even though it's Buffalo, I'm not sure that's the route we want to go this week. Play around with it. Here's the key. I'm going to lay out a bunch of different stacks here. Chris has laid them out in the plug. Go to DraftKings, go to FanDuel, and just start building different ways. If you don't have the lineup builder, that's fine. You don't need it. Obviously, we encourage you to use it because it's very visual, and it can put lineups together quickly and more efficiently than you or I can as a human. So go check it out if you have it. But even if not, just like hand build some Buffalo lineups, hand build some Seattle lineups, and just build and just see what you can put together. Because I have a feeling these next couple stacks, you'll build them and be like, wow, I actually like this better than this Buffalo stack. The other one that Chris wrote up in the plug was Miami. Obviously, right? Tua to Tyreek to Waddle, nobody else to throw into. There was a great article on The Ringer this week about how Tua is just throwing deep early, often, all the time to Waddle and Hill, and they're completed passes, and it's just a crazy efficient offense built for these two speedsters. So yeah, anytime you can double stack those two guys. Honestly, if you want to take one out or add a 4-0 for small field contests, you can throw in Gesicki, who's been getting a lot of red zone work. He's super cheap. And then here's the other question: do you run it back? Do you run it back with a bear? I'm partial to Darnell Mooney because he has a high floor despite a low pass volume offense. Still hasn't scored a touchdown this year. Guys who don't score touchdowns that frequently, they're going to have a blowout game at some point. So Mooney's going to have a 25, 30-point game at 2% ownership. I don't want to miss it. So I'm playing Mooney every week. Will it be against Miami? Why not in a game that we like to stack? All right, before we get to these next games, let's go through some of these questions. Let's see here. So Clay says, Aaron Rodgers looks like his old self this week. Aaron Rodgers to Romeo Doubs. Yeah, that's the other option here. So let's go to Green Bay. 50-point total, the highest total of the week, by the way. So Alan Lazard is questionable. I think he's going to play. He practiced all week. So you have the option to Lazard. You have the option to Romeo Doubs. The issue is Green Bay has been obsessed with running the ball. Aaron Jones is the best play on the board here. Sure, you could pivot, and you want to play Green Bay. I get it. The other option is Detroit has been mixing up their offense and distributing the ball to all kinds of different guys. So they couldn't get there in a run back last week with Miami. That was the other issue if you play a game stack. But I get it. And this game is certainly going to pop in some metrics as well, and I have no fault if anyone wants to play Green Bay stacks here. The nice thing is, though, again, we talked about Swift being out or limited. DJ Chark remains out. Josh Reynolds is also out. I mean, it would be shocking for Amon-Ra St. Brown not to get 10-plus targets here. But Even so, Khalif Raymond's super cheap and going to be the wide receiver too. So he's an option in game stacks too. And then TJ Hawkinson was traded. They have Brock Wright. They have James Mitchell. Both these guys are 2,500 will play. So another cheap Curtis Samuel piece added to those stacks as well if you need it. All right, let's see. See, Monty says, do you have advice for us entering contests with 20,000 plus people in it? Yeah, the advice is don't enter it unless you can enter the maximum number of lineups. And if you ignore that advice, that's fine. It's your bankroll. You want to play DFS the way you want to play it. Stack as much as you can. Use the strategies we outline in our strategy guide. Neil says, I'm hearing everywhere people touting Rodgers. Any chance Allen comes in with lower than expected ownership and high risk since he's so much more expensive than everyone else? That's definitely possible. Let's go to the ownership really quickly at quarterback on DraftKings especially. I mean, we have Allen at 14, Rodgers at 12, and again, the smaller the contest gets, the more ownership condenses. So I wouldn't be shocked if both these guys end up 15% plus, honestly. I don't think Allen's going to get – if Rodgers ends up more owned, I don't think it's necessarily going to take away from Allen. It's going to take away from some of these other guys in that mid-tier. Jimmy says, how much value do you put in past performance versus a team? Basically zero, just because players, personnel, schemes, coaches, all that changes. A player's ability increases or decreases, so I really don't put too much into it. Ken, how about your highest exposed player, a low-owned player you have a ton of, and a popular chalk you are fading? All good questions. Let's see here. Swaggy says, Deion Jackson season. Okay, all right, nice. What's up, Swaggy? So I haven't fully built yet, Ken, but just to kind of answer, just looking at highest exposed player, normally for me, it's a running back. Let's go to DraftKings. I mean, it will probably be ETN. I'm going to have a ton of Gibson. I'm gonna plant my flag there. I think Gibson's a great play this week. Normally going to spread it out at receiver. And then tight end, I'll have a bunch of the guys at the top of the model. Ertz, Gerald Everett, those guys for sure. A low-owned player I'll have a ton of. Let's see here. Let's go to receiver because that's normally where it comes into play. These guys are the ones I'm playing a ton of. I mean, I think it's got to be Mike Evans. 6% projected on DraftKings, 9% on FanDuel. That offense is going to explode. Tom Brady leads the league in passing yards, which may be crazy if you haven't been following. Leads the league in passing yards, but his touchdown percentage is like 3 percentage points lower than his career average. Yeah, he's probably washed, but also that's going to regress at some point. And when it does, Evans and or Godwin are going to have a multi-touchdown game. The model's picking up on something. It hasn't ranked Evans this highly all year. So for Evans to be top 2 in the model and sub 10% ownership, that's a guy I'll be willing to take some stands on. And then popular chalk you're fading, it's probably Deion Jackson. I think for the most part, again, I haven't built yet. He does open up a ton. But I think it's one of those situations where we see it and he ends up scoring 7-8 points. And we're like, oh, of course he only scored 7-8 points in that spot. All right, folks. Let's see here. 3:48. I'll be here for about 7 more minutes. I want to hop out at 3:55 just to make sure there's no random last-minute UFC cancellations once again. Okay, here. A couple questions about Minnesota and Washington. Yeah, that game, I think, on the surface would be one that you'd be like, maybe that'll shoot out. It's not on my radar. Let's go back to quarterbacks. Washington is content with slowing it down. That's obviously an issue. Total. And, yeah, Vegas isn't on it either. We look at the total here. Just 43.5, which might be lower than some of you may expect. So I get it. I understand clear target trees on Minnesota side. Washington has Scary Terry. The Gibson value opens up. So I get it. It won't be a stack that I'm playing. Instead, some of these other stacks, let's go back to the stacks that we were talking about. Chicago and Minnesota. So let's go back to it here on DraftKings. All right, let's get out of Detroit here. So obviously the Miami side makes sense. The Chicago side is interesting too, but not from like a traditional stack perspective. Because obviously, if you followed us, you read our guides, you read the content, you know we're big on 3-1 stacks. I really think you can play a really weird stack here with Chicago, in where you play just Fields and you run it back with Tyreek and or Waddle, or Mostert even. You can pair him up with Mooney too, obviously. If you're a Mooney fan like I am. But I think a 2-1 stack with Chicago and even a 1-1 or a 1-2 stack can work. It's a really weird slate where a lot of these run backs. The same thing happens over in the Atlanta Chargers game. The Chargers is one of the best stacks this week overall. Chris did write this up. And the reason is because we get so much value that we can stack this a little bit differently than we normally do too. Because if you play Herbert, 7,200, I think Chris talked about this in his video that was posted this morning, so make sure you watch that after you watch this. You could play Eckler, who's going to catch a ton of passes without Keenan Allen, without Mike Williams. Josh Palmer is going to be the wide receiver 1 at 5,100. Michael Bandy's going to slot in as the wide receiver 2 at 3,500. DeAndre Carter, officially questionable. Just got news a few hours ago. He is going to play. It was just an illness, so he'll be good. He's 4,300, starting slot. Then you have Gerald Everett, 4,800, starting tight end. So these 6 guys, you can build so many different ways, and it saves so much salary. And if you're playing small field contests, if you remember a couple weeks ago in the $1 Million Mission, we talked about super stacking, mega stacking, whatever you want to call it. You can easily play 4 Chargers in a lineup. You could even play 5 if you expect them to score a ton of points. With the caveat being, if you play 4 or 5 guys, you want to play at least a tight end and then probably a running back as well, because it's unlikely that 3 receivers get there, if that makes sense. So if you play some combination of the Chargers, you don't have to necessarily run it back because Atlanta just runs the ball 1,000 times. Cordell Patterson is back. He's probably my favorite run back, activated off IR just an hour ago or so. Running back with CPAP. If you want to get frisky and you want to try and hope Drake London or Kyle Pitts scores and gets 100 yards on 3 targets, you could also do that. I think the best way is just to play it 3-0, 4-0, maybe 4-1, maybe 3-1 with CPAT. But against another stack where you don't necessarily have to run it back. And the same goes with a really weird stack. You could play Mariota because you save $2,000 over Herbert and some of these other quarterbacks. Mariota, who's going to run, going to throw it to some of these other guys. We've seen Damiere Byrd. We've seen Zacchaeus, backup tight ends, catch touchdowns. And Mariota at 5,300 allows you to play. You could play a 1-2, a 1-3 stack, something really crazy. Again, I encourage you after you watch this to go build and just try out different ideas. 3-1 stacks aren't necessarily something you have to stick to this week when you're playing some of these weirder matchups, especially in some of these mispriced games. Was there any other stack I wanted to discuss? Let's see here. I think that's it. Vegas and Jacksonville sticks out a little to me too. Go play around with that. And the nice thing about that is we have popular running backs in ETN, in Josh Jacobs. I don't think Jacobs is as popular. Let's go back to running backs and ownership really quickly. But ETN especially. ETN the most popular on DraftKings. Jacobs number 4. So 2 popular running backs. If the touchdown variance goes in way of the passing game, not only do we get leverage off of popular running backs, now we have a super low-owned stack that no one else is playing. So you can play Trevor Lawrence with Christian Kirk, Ingram, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones, Vegas with Derek Carr. Watch the Darren Waller news. He's still officially questionable. We could have a cheap tight end in Foster Moreau. Hunter Renfrow, Matt Collins. So different ways to play it. I think I prefer the Jacksonville side there. But yeah, that's an interesting one as well. I don't know if I'll necessarily play it, but it was popping a little bit in my rankings. All right, let's go back to these questions, these comments. Who's the best cheap defense and why is it Carolina? I honestly think it's Atlanta. Atlanta's my favorite cheap defense. Let's go to the model. Just giving you guys all the sauce today. If you're not subscribed, make sure you are. Atlanta, super cheap on both sites, especially on FanDuel at 3,100 against the Chargers, who pass a ton, have offensive line injuries, have had offensive line injuries all year, missing a bunch of receivers. If we're wrong, not necessarily if we're wrong, just if they can't move the ball with backup receivers, Atlanta's defense is going to benefit. Who else? Seattle on DraftKings, obviously against Arizona, because as we all stack Arizona, we know how that game ends up anyways, and so we could play Seattle's defense to take advantage of that. And yeah, Carolina checks in at number 6 against Cincinnati. We witnessed on national TV Cincinnati their inability to protect Joe Burrow. Does it have to do with Jamar Chase? Does it have to do with whatever was going on? Maybe it's because they were playing against Myles Garrett. That's probably a big factor. But yeah, they got Brian Burns, who's just as dynamic. So yeah, I think Carolina's a great cheap punt option as well. However, they're going to be one of those popular on DraftKings at 11% ownership, number 2 overall. So, all right. Final question. This is how we normally end this show. Best, worst play, worst, best play. Guy that's highly owned that we think bust. Guy that is sub 5% that we think is going to go off or that we'll play a ton of. So let's go to receiver. That's generally where we end up here. As far as big as bust, I think it's Deion Jackson on FanDuel, which again is scary fading a guy who should be the lead dog at 5K. Spidey senses are tingling though. That's all I can say on that one. As far as low owned, talked about Mike Evans. I don't think he's low owned enough for this particular segment. Khalif Raymond certainly in play. We had some discourse in Discord yesterday about Khalif Raymond for sure. But honestly, I think the one that is a great pivot to me, I'm just going to look at Chargers receivers here because the industry is hopping on Michael Bandy more and more. I would be shocked if he came in at 3% on DraftKings. We're going to update our ownership here tonight. But I have a feeling he ends up over 10%. Just looking at some other industry sites and what's popping up and you use their builders, I think Bandy is going to end up plus 10, 10% plus. And if that's the case, if he's popular, and again, we'll update the ownership here. DeAndre Carter is the easy pivot. He's not a practice squad guy. And he's going to be a starting slot receiver in this offense. And if we can get a fraction of the ownership discount, even a fraction of the ownership off Josh Palmer, who has not been that impressive, despite all we want him to be, he hasn't been that impressive with the extended opportunities. So DeAndre Carter's a guy I think that's a great pivot if you're playing this game stack or if you're just you're looking for a cheap one-off. We'll use Carter as the best worst play. So, all right, that'll do it for the show. Appreciate you all listening, tuning in. Again, if you're watching this on replay, appreciate that as well. Chris is going to be in the Discord at 11 a.m. Eastern for the live Q&A. If you guys are in the Discord, make sure you're taking advantage of these live Q&As. Obviously, we have the NFL one every Sunday morning, but our lead NBA analyst, Chuck, does one 30 minutes before every single NBA lock, and we get invaluable information from him. He's a great GPP player, great NBA DFS player in general. So just make sure you're checking that out. And again, all the stuff you saw here today is ActiveFantasy.com. It does update every single day, every few hours for NFL. So a lot of stuff you saw today will probably be updated by Sunday morning. So just make sure you subscribe to ActiveFantasy.com/membership. Final ask, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. If you're not already, just make sure you're subscribed and get notified when we go live, upload any new videos. Appreciate you listening. Brian Jester, Active Fantasy, and good luck in NFL Week 9.